Just me. All right. Well, I'm looking at the time. We just started chatting, and so I thought, hey David.
Okay.
So we can get started. Sometimes Dan and I start chatting and I lose track of time. Every time Dan and I start chatting, I lose track of time.
That would be a fun webinar where all of a sudden it's 11:15. Everyone's like, okay, we need to get.
Like, come on. Like, you two are here for a purpose. Okay, so let's actually get to not where you live and where your favorite travel destinations are, but the actual content of the webinar. So hold on, I was practicing sharing my screen earlier to make sure I get to the right one. Let's see if the luck remains. Let's see. Yes. Okay. I was joking with my head of marketing that probably the number of times I've shared my screen in my life and it was the wrong screen in a webinar, more than I would like to admit. So I feel like when it doesn't happen, it's joy all around. So thank you so much, all of you, for joining us today. I'm here with my great friend Dan, as you can tell from our banter back and forth. And there are many different topics that Dan and I are passionate about, and we love to have these sessions and share knowledge, share questions, share things we hope that we can collectively all figure out in the future, because any of these topics that we tackle are big topics that don't necessarily have, a definitive solution yet. And that's what makes it so interesting and fun to be able to talk about all together. So today we're going to talk about different generations. And in, choosing this topic and preparing this webinar, there are a lot of different diversity areas that organizations look at, that we study. And what was really interesting is that a few articles that we read leading up to today, we saw quite a few authors say, inside of organizations, when you look at different efforts, whether it's communication or, some traditional D&I efforts, age is not thought about as commonly as gender and race. And we thought, we are getting more and more people in the workplace. People are going to be working longer. And there's some really big opportunities, I think, that we can look at as employers, as organizations, in a way to really create even better cultures than, what we're maybe thinking about today. So, as a quick way of introduction, again, I'm Sanja Licina. I'm the president of Question Pro Workforce. I'm an organizational psychologist. I have a few decades of work experience at this point. As I was mentioning earlier, I currently live in Buenos Aires, Argentina. I'm originally from Serbia, from former Yugoslavia. I spent most of my formative years, about 21 of them, and all of my formal education in the US between Michigan and Chicago. Had a quick stint in the UK for a couple of years in London. And am now residing in South America. So love, being in different cultures, love getting to know different people. And so again, this is why, part of the reason why this topic is really near and dear to my heart, because especially spending time in different places, again, how we grow, how we develop, how we connect, how we learn is something that's changing so much. And so, especially when it comes, today we'll focus on ages and explore what are the different things that organizations are doing today and what are some things that we can think about for the future. So with that, Dan, welcome again. I'll hand over the mic to you to introduce yourself, if you don't mind, for any of those on the call that might not know you yet.
Yes, and again, so happy to be chatting with you. This, like you said, we always explore unique topics and important topics, and I hope relevant topics for everybody listening. And this one, I think, while we're not going to provide any concrete, exact answers today, we're going to explore it and we're going to do our best to dissect it a little bit and give you some thoughts and opinions that we have. And I was just thinking, as you said that, you said you have a couple decades of work. I hate to even admit this. Think, I think I can almost say 3 decades, and that kind of freaks me out. I mean, if you count like the first 6 years before I founded my first company, I was doing more music, but I was doing temp work and I was working a little bit in the HR space. So I'm getting really close to 3 decades. So there
Oh.
you go. I don't know. I don't know.
I'm rounding mine a little bit too. It's a, loose definition. We get some
But
experience.
yes, yes. And I'm the a co-founder of Radical, and I'll talk about what we do in a moment. But yes, I've spent the better part of my professional life really focused on people and culture and how do we amplify voices and how do we create amazing, beautiful, connected culture. And some of my other hobbies and passions are music and filmmaking, and I actually try to make all of these work together. I'm a big believer in the arc of storytelling and the arc of creation, and so I'm really excited about this conversation today. I think there's so much we can dive into, and we have some great data that Sanja and Question Pro have brought to the table, and so it's going to be super fun. So thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you, Dan, for that introduction. So real quick, Dan and I will tell you why we're talking about this, what our companies are all about to provide some context. So I mentioned I'm the president of Workforce at Question Pro. So I live and breathe employee experience. That's what energizes me in the morning. That's my biggest passion. I won't bore you with the details of my history and how that came about, but it's a lot. It's tied to a lot of my personal values, personal experiences. A big part of why I decided to be an organizational psychologist. And in my role today, I work and my team works with organizations to really give all of their employees a voice and know what it is that they love about, your organization and what it is that they feel like, if we could just do these one or two things better, I would stay here longer. I would love it even more. I would shout it from the rooftops and invite others to join us. But Question Pro doesn't only do employee experience, we also do customer experience because, happy customers, happy employees, there's a huge relationship there. And a large part of our business is around market research. And actually, today, the data that we'll be, alluding to, sharing, using off as a jumping off point for our discussion was actually from a market research study that we did at Question Pro. And I think to me, I had this huge fortune that I found Question Pro and that I've known the CEO for probably about 2 decades. I was one of Question Pro's first clients when it was first founded. And in my curiosity and my passion to help organizations really become just the best places to work, I'm also looking always at, what is going on in the market? What is going on with the different people's desires? What are they looking for? Not just inside of our clients, but how can we grab as much information as possible and help our clients know what's most important to us today? What are people thinking about? A lot of times I get asked, like, what is it that I don't know? What should I be looking at? And so we really lean on our market research part of the business to inform a lot of that. And now, of course, the fun part is that every organization is different, and market research very often is directional. It's indicative. It gives us things to think about, but it's not a definitive answer inside the organization. It just bubbles up that passion for additional questions that are important for us to be asking inside our own organization. So that's a little bit about Question Pro. And Dan, I'll let you introduce Radical next.
Yeah, and thank you. A great intro, and I will just say this, that I think Sonny and I connect on an incredible passion to really make an impact and make a difference. And I so I'm always honored when I get a chance to share ideas with you and ideate with you, and so thanks again for having me on your our webinar together, and it's going to be a great 45 minutes. So really fast, what we believe every person deserves an epic work experience. Um, and um, and that's just, that is the pure passion. That's what I wake up every day fighting for. How we define epic, I will just say, for the most part, it's being connected, it's having purpose, it's having alignment, it's feeling like you're making an impact. There's a lot that goes into how we define an epic work experience, but ultimately, epic sort of speaks for itself, right? You're happy, you show up excited, you're motivated, and you can't wait until the next day. Of course, there's ups and downs and there's tough moments, but for the most part, you're digging work, you love work. And how we work, we do, and I love saying this, that we empower every individual to defy gravity and rewrite their own work story through creative, truth-based, human-centric design. We do this through an advisory side of our business. And we also do this, and I'm excited to say this now, I'm publicly saying this more often, is we are releasing um, I would call groundbreaking platform that is focused on accelerating connection, capability, and impact. And this will be released in the fall. Our hope is it is for the people, by the people, to empower individuals throughout their work journey. And it fits beautifully into what we're talking about today as someone is starting and joining the workforce. How can we help them? How can we guide them? How can we create connection for them? How can we speed things up, create opportunity? We can create a technology that helps, but ultimately it's about understanding, awareness, and that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. So can't wait.
I'm so excited. I can't wait to be one of your first users.
Yes, well, soon.
Dan and I were catching up yesterday in preparation to the webinar, and we'd carved out about an hour. And I think the first 35, 40 minutes, I was just asking him so much about what they're building and everything ahead. It's so definitely all of you keep an eye out. It's going to be quite remarkable. So just real quick, again, this webinar is not about a particular study that we did. However, we do reference a lot of the data, like I was mentioning, as a starting off point for our discussion. And last year, towards the end of the year, we surveyed a little bit over 10,000 workers across the United States. And a big part of the reason why we did it is to create a benchmark for our employee experience surveys. But you better believe it, as I was saying, I'm a researcher at heart. So now, over the last several months, I've been really digging into the different data. And I mentioned, we have over 120 questions to pick from. In a lot of the writing that we've done, a lot of the webinars, a lot of conference presentations that we do, we pull on this data. We haven't published it anywhere in its entirety because, as you can imagine, with this much research, it would probably be more of a book than a research piece. But I'm leaving here, and of course, all of you will get the slides and get the recording. If you ever want to reference any of the data that we talk about today, and you want to know a little bit more about the background of the different people that participated in the study, you can grab it from this slide. So just a little bit of, a deeper dive into some of the highlights that we're gonna share. So as we're starting off, one of the things that, when Dan and I were preparing again, and we were talking about this multi-generational workplace. So when I first got formally into the workforce, like after my master's and PhD, like my first full-time job, studying about Gen Y or millennials was all the rage. I'm like, what is this generation gonna do? They're blowing everything up, they're messing everything up. And probably some of the first research papers that I did at that stage were all about millennials and what's going on with this group. And over the years, I had gone in and out of different focus areas and didn't continue to only focus on the different generations. So preparing for today, I was like, wait, let's do a refresher on what the different generations are. And so it's funny, you'll see a couple of interesting parallels that in a lot of our slides, we don't necessarily break down the data insights, particularly by the generation, because the 10-year buckets are different than the generations. But I had to do the math and I kept it for all of you, so you don't have to do it. So if somebody was born in 25 to 45, like, how old are they today? And if somebody was born from 46 to 64, how old are they today? A little bit of mental gymnastics, but we shared it with you just so you can know, like, who are these different individuals, what are the age spreads, and what does that look like in reference to our upcoming conversation.
Yeah, and hey, can we do a if do not feel obligated, but Sonia already knows what I'm gonna.
Oh, I think I do. I feel what's going
I mean, look, we're talking about it. I mean, it's like own your age, be proud of your age. I mean, I don't know. That's my belief. I'd love to know the spread. I'm guessing we don't have too many Gen Alphas on the call unless you're like Doogie Howser and
Mateo's not here today. I have a 5-year-old that before he was in school all the time, he would love to pop in all of our meetings. So Mateo would have been representing Gen Alpha. Today he's at school right now. So
But
are you daring our guests to tell us what generation they're
yeah,
from?
yeah. And if you're not, fine. But I'm suspect two of you are going to be brave enough. You're not giving your age, you're giving a pretty wide range, so it's
Yeah.
not that huge of an ask. So just drop it in.
Well,
All right, we have an Xer, perfect, the best generation. So
Um, so I'll say there's also, and I'm not saying I chose a chart because of this or this graphical representation. Just like in horoscopes, there's some loose guidelines of which generation you fall into. Full disclosure, 1980, which
well,
sometimes is Gen Y, sometimes is Gen X.
yeah, I mean
In this
there's the cusp.
particular cutoff, I'm going with Y.
So we have all right. So we have a boomer, fantastic, and I love that. We have X. We have a majority. Looks like Ys are kind of taking the lead here. Do we have any Zs? Do we have any Zs? I know. There we go. We perfect.
We
Gen Z.
go. Ah.
We're covered 100% Gen Alpha, but and I just suspect we might not have any builders on, but we might. But we might.
Sometimes my parents join, but I think after a while they gave up. Like at first, when I started doing more webinars and podcasts, like they were so excited and they were my biggest fans. And then they're like, oh my God, how many of these do you do? So
Exactly.
if they were on today, they could have probably raised their hand as
Yes.
builders.
Well, thank you everyone for sharing that. Thanks. I appreciate that. It's just helpful to set context and do feel free and a part of this, and I think when we started, just to make it clear, this is a conversation and we're gonna give guidance and present some data and we're gonna riff a little bit, give you some thoughts, but chime in with ideas. I'm a huge believer in healthy conversation around this, and there is no, again, like I stated, there is no perfect formula to make six generations work beautifully and connect beautifully like puzzle pieces in the workplace. So ideas, things that you're doing in your organization that's working or hasn't been working, do share along the way. And we'll do some more official Q&A at the end as
Yeah.
well.
And things that you're doing personally too.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
always like personally in personal relationships or just personally like with your teams, with your managers, with your direct report, with anyone. I love tips and I'll always tell you my bloopers too, because let me tell you,
I'm
life is
dying
full
my
of them.
I'm dyeing my gray beard. That's so I'm pretending to be Z. I'm doing that. It's my tip. It's not working clearly. So it doesn't work.
Love it. All right, so let's jump into our first data point. So this I had a very interesting reflection on. So you'll see here we in the previous slide defined the generations, and here we very nicely had like buckets of 10 years, which is usually I think traditionally what's used in research. However, I was reflecting back on when my team and I were deciding the demographics for our market research study, and we're thinking, okay, like let's what's the latest convention and defining genders, and let's make sure that we're grabbing that, and what are all the races that we want to cover, and age groups are like decades, let's go. And so that's what I was mentioning when I looked at the generations. I was like, shoot, it doesn't match up. Now, what was interesting is again what I was mentioning before, that a lot of D&I research, we found that usually age is one of the things that is least addressed and least looked at. And I thought, okay, well, at least I'm not alone. Next year when we do, or this year, it's already 2024. When we do this study, I'll definitely consider, do we continue to do 10-year buckets for trending? Do we change it into more generational? Definitions. But I will fully admit that when we were looking at, again, the demographic variables that we wanted to collect, this wasn't the demographic one that we gave so much research and thought and attention to, but we are now. And so what was interesting, and this is another thing that I did a little bit of external research, and I'll be very clear that the point of this slide is not to like definitively say this is what HR departments, what the demographics are. It's not. That was not the purpose of the study. But one of the things that Dan and I were looking at as we were preparing for this is a lot of time when we make decisions and when we think about things, we have our own unique perspective, right? And the reason why we do research and the reason why we do surveys is to collect more information. But we don't always stop and pause to say, wait, how different are other people's experiences than mine? And what are the experiences that I've had? And what are the ones that I haven't? And one thing that really stuck out to me in this age breakdown is that it's not HR departments might not necessarily be representative in age compared to what the workforce looks like. Um, and I don't know if that's something that you're thinking about inside your organization. I don't know how much that you've considered that. And then I don't know, like one of, if you want to bring up one of the things that we talked about yesterday. So to me, one of, when I looked at this data, I thought, okay, so, me at the ripe age of 44, I have not been older yet. And so, okay, it's really important for me to know what are those who are older than me? What are they thinking? What are they're experiencing? Because I haven't had that experience yet. But then in Dan and mine's conversation, what I realized is, wait a minute, the world is very different today than when I was anywhere 18 to 24. So even though I've lived through that, it's probably not a good thing for me to assume that anyone that's younger than me today is experiencing the same thing I am today. Probably not even my age group because we all have unique characteristics. But that was one of the things as Dan and I were discussing, the what do we feel more comfortable because we've had experience and the world is very different today than a couple of decades ago when we were entering the workforce.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's, and this will be a theme. I think in some other data that does a nice job talking through this as well. But it's yeah, very different. It's hard. It's always hard to apply, a current state of what it was like when we were 22, 23, 24, entering to the workforce to what it is now, right? There is it's it's so drastically different, or to apply standards of how it should be. And I think we do that too often, right? We sort of we look backwards and we don't look forward enough to recognize that in fact 20 years we're going to be looking back at things that we were doing now at our age, and we're going to say, how could we have possibly thought like that or act like that? I mean, so this is just progress. This is change at its best for the most part. So I think that's that awareness, and I do, I would say just from being and working in HR for 20 to 30 years, this data doesn't surprise me.
Mm.
Um, so I think it screams of the importance of listening and making sure you really understand, what your people care about, what matters to them, not making assumptions based on, again, I'm 38 or I'm 40 or I'm 42. And so it's the art of listening, and HR is getting better and better at that. I continue to challenge HR. It's not about just pushing tech. It's not about pushing surveys. It's not just about, pushing employee experience tools. It's about really listening to your people and what do they need? What do they need to feel empowered? What do they need to feel connected? And then I think regardless of this age spread, we start to have a little more holistic conversation and connection across the
Yeah.
workforce.
Yeah. And one thing to add to that that we won't dive into today, but I would encourage you maybe either, read this Harvard Business Review article or there's, a decent amount of literature out there, is the fact that when 65 was established as a retirement age, I think people were living a lot shorter. And now we're fortunate that we're living longer. And oftentimes people want to work longer, partly because they feel like it keeps their brain engaged, it keeps them sharp, they're learning new things. Now, there's a lot, being set out there around like the different working arrangements. Is it full time until when? Could there be more flexible working arrangements? Part time, what does that look like? But there's going to be right now, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics and other researchers, we're seeing that the span of how much people are working is going to grow. And so it's good to think about what does that look like for your organization? And then are there any things that you need to put in place where you can get some of the more tenured and senior workers, either retain them for longer or attract them to your organization? And what are some of the things that they need that are maybe similar to your existing workforce or maybe slightly different to create a culture for them where they feel like they can really thrive and be productive? Because I think we don't want to have the mindset that, oh, somebody is around just because they want to keep themselves busy. For the majority of like instances, people still want to really make an impact and they still want to make a difference and they want to learn new things. So that is, I think, a little bit of a, still unexplored territory, in a place that thinking ahead of what kind of culture can we build for, people that are post what we traditionally thought retirement age is an important thing to keep in mind and start to evaluate. And that actually goes into our um, next data point that talks about learning. And I don't know, Dan, if you want to kick us off, so I'm not always stealing all the data and the first
No,
insights.
well, I mean, this slide's, I think, I love this slide because and one thing, just to kind of triple down on something you just said, Sanja, we've done some research recently, and the number one thing that wins across age, across organization type role is impact. Is feeling like you're making an impact in the organization. You have to remove the sharp edges, because if you don't, the sharp edges sort of, they get in the way, whether that's pay equity, whether that's flexibility, whether that's just culture and people that you like working with. So like, but ultimately, if you get those things right, impact, people want to make impact. So I just want to just really, you know, put a hammer on that because that's so important. And I love that. That was so refreshing to hear. So this slide, I love this. So ultimately, what we're saying, we're talking about L&D, and for those who, it's really about lifelong learning, right? And this data is looking at who's hungry to learn more, whether it's personal development, skills development, classes, mentorship, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And you can see the curve. For the most part, it starts off pretty high from a strongly agree standpoint, and continues to rise until around the age range that was sitting in HR. And then we see a dip, or where learning becomes a little less important. And there's a handful of reasons for this. Sometimes you get comfortable, and it's good enough. And you developed a certain set of skills, and you're happy, you're making enough to get by, you're making more than enough to get by. So the desire to continue to learn decreases. With that said, and this data is this shape of data is actually held for many years. I do think, and
Mhm.
Sonia, I want to get your opinion on this. I think with the rise of AI, with the rise of change, the rapid acceleration of technology, we're going to start to see a lift and a change. Because to your point, people want to continue to make an impact. And they're continuing to work longer, and we're healthier for the most part. So we're working in the workplace longer. And so we do need to continue to develop our skills and develop new technology skills and or new whatever role we might be in. And so I
No.
think we're going to start to see a shift. So I'm looking forward to watch this data change.
Yeah.
Uh, but I
Well, and
really
I think
love this as a starting point.
yeah, and I think it's also interesting to think about, if you are in the L&D space, what kind of learnings are and what kind of courses, what kind of budgets are you offering? Because one of the things that, people are saying, I'm satisfied with what's offered to me. Is it that at the beginning of the career, there are some basic maybe things that don't change as much? There is, project management, effective communication, which can change, but has some fundamental building blocks. Um, it could be leadership, how we lead, especially when it talks about compassion and empathy. There have been some changes, but a lot of principles still stand. So in organizations, do we tend to share a lot of the fundamental building blocks? And then we figure, well, people have the toolkit that they need, and we don't necessarily diversify. Or I think, Dan, to your point, one of the things with AI, and this is something I've talked about for a long time, even before AI was a thing. I think even when like messaging apps started to come up, or like things like even Slack and Teams came up, when organizations onboard people to different technologies, or when somebody new joins an organization, it's so important to think about like what level of knowledge do they have already, what level of comfort do they have with things that you want them to learn, and how are you approaching that? So is it something that's, you know, adaptable based on level? Can people opt in? Can you start somebody maybe a little bit slower? Because maybe not everybody, and we'll share this data point a little bit later, maybe not everybody has the comfort to say, I don't fully understand this. Can you help me? Can I, I'm in this training and I feel like I'm missing a 101. Like I feel like
Yeah.
I'm missing the introductory course and I'm a little bit lost. And so to really, either understand people different level of comfort, or allow them to opt into the way that's best for them to learn, but without them feeling bad or embarrassed, or like, now I see, even for me, and by now you all know how old I am, like my comfort level with AI and how I use it day to day, and it's different than some of my younger team members. And I see them jumping into different things, and I'm trying and I'm kind of catching up. And I'm pushing myself because it's important to me. But even like just day to day, anecdotally, without any formal training programs, I'm seeing the difference in our comfort level and just how we approach the way that we upskill ourselves.
Yeah, and I love that. And I think there's also there's something really specific about the way you asked this question too, and that's sad. Not so much it might be related to desire to learn, but it's also, am I satisfied with the organization's learning processes
Yeah.
or L&D courses? And I think there's something something interesting that happens. When you first join, you're hungry. You want to learn, and there's some Gen Z and Y, a lot for the majority of this call. There's Gen Z and Yers, and I think, and I don't want to make any. I always hate to generalize, but there's a level of confidence around asking, wanting to learn more, and being comfortable, as long as you're in a safe, trusted environment where you can raise your hand and say, I want to learn this. I need to learn how to do this. I want to grow. I want to expand.
Yeah.
But the older you get, there's a little bit like, well, I should know how to do this.
Hmm.
And so I want my learning to be very tailored and to sort of just be there for me when I need it, why I need it, where I need it. And so I think there's an interesting reality that happens, which we need to fix. We should always, number one, always raise our hand and say, I don't understand this.
Yeah.
So any manager leader, give space for people to your people to raise their hand and say, I don't know. I don't get it. I don't understand. Don't ever make someone feel like we should.
Yeah.
And so that's number one. And it doesn't matter if you're a newbie starting or if it's someone who's been with your organization for 25 years. Because guess what? Someone who's been there for 25 years, things are changing rapidly. And in fact, in some cases, they might be the first not to understand, because things are happening so quickly. So I really think there's this big drop, from 31 to 21 is an opportunity for L&D. And the final thing I'll say is, the way we learn is so in the process, in the flow now. Think about YouTube. If you need to, I'll speak for myself. If I need to change a, change an outlet in the house, I don't go back to my electrical background, and I literally go to YouTube and say, how do you change a and follow the steps right then, right there when I need it. And it's relevant. Or if I'm fixing a dishwasher, like I type in the model number, here it is. Here's a little 2-minute tutorial. I can fix it. It's done. So,
Yeah.
I mean, and that's the way training needs to be. It needs to be relevant. It needs to be timely. It needs to be unique. It needs to be personalized. And I do think younger workers are more comfortable asking and raising their hand. And as we get a little older into the workforce, there's this sense of, I got this, when sometimes you really don't. And it's
Yeah.
okay to raise your hand.
Yeah. I'm laughing a little bit because I'm thinking of my 5-year-old who sometimes will ask me and Martine something, and we're like, we don't know. He's like, okay, well, Google knows. okay, Google, and he'll go, like, oh no, we've created a tiny little monster, but he knows where to find the answer. So to your point, like the preview of Gen Alpha will be, hey,
I
I'll
mean,
ask around me, you don't know, I'm gonna go out there and figure it out, and technology is gonna help me.
it's funny. Gen Alpha, for those of us who get the chance to talk to the Gen Alpha and get to know them, sometimes their thoughts around even the conversation like this, or if we dive into workforce planning or we dive into employee listening, it's sort of like, why are you guys making things so complicated?
Yeah.
Like, shouldn't we just like learn, show up, give our best, be connected, learn when we need to learn. And sometimes you scratch your head and you say, yeah, maybe we are overcomplicating sometimes. So it's so important, to get that voice. I think we need to hear from early, even in college still, or even in high school still, in voices around what do they imagine work to look like and feel like? How do
Yeah.
they expect to learn? I want to do more and more of that. And I think organizations need to do more of that. And I
Yeah.
know there's a trend to really bring in younger voices. Certainly
Yeah.
early workers, 21, 22, 23, 24, but even those who aren't even in the workforce yet.
Yeah. I love that. And I was having this moment of, I can't remember if this is the next slide. I can't remember. And I didn't want to cut you off, but I took a chance. Mentoring and the allyship and exact
Yes.
like
Yes. Well, I mean,
like I think it's the next one. I think it's the
it
next
was
one because
just
you
an alley-oop.
usually
I
talk
knew
about
it
it.
was next. I was setting the slide up.
I love it.
Sonny's like, yeah, yeah, of course you were, Dan.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You knew it. You had it on your other screen. So I know we talk about mentorship in the presentation, but it's the next one. Am I gonna cut him off? No. So exactly what you were talking about. I think in a more like traditional way, when we think about mentorship or allyship programs, they've been around for a while. And generally we think about, somebody who's more tenured, more experienced, mentoring somebody else who's younger, maybe just centered, somebody who's a high potential. But Dan, everything that you were just saying feeds into this so perfectly because we have so much to learn from each other. And I
Yes.
think at some point, I'm going to say this cautiously, it's not even more like that I look, I don't know if it's equal, maybe it's equal. I look to my younger colleagues because there are things like Gia, our head of marketing, who's on the call with us, does amazing things with design. She does a lot of things really amazingly. But one of the things I was in the other day was Canva, and it was looking to prepare a slide. And I'm like, oh man, some things I know and some things I don't. And I said, hey, Guy, for one of our one-on-ones, let's make it a note. I'd love to get better at this. And there's some things. And then Martine's daughter came in, who's 11, and she's like, oh, you're using Canva. And I felt the coolest. But like our 11-year-old knows these technologies. And so I told her, oh, Clara,
Uh-huh.
like maybe one day we can sit down together and you can show me how you're using it because I'd love to know, and we all know how storytelling is important. We all know that if you can do something in a visual way to tell a story, to get to somebody's emotion, it's priceless. And I want that skill. To me, that's critical. And I think the younger generations can teach me that pretty well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Let's dig into the slide and before we do that, who on the call has had and we're going to define mentor a little bit and talk about the word a little bit and whether it's allyship or guide, but but using the word mentor for now because we all are familiar with the word. Who on this call has had a mentor that's been influential in personal life or work life? Can I just say yes? And if you want to share, and it was useless or it was the most amazing thing, would love to see a few comments on that. Um, and we can start chatting, but I would
Yeah.
love to know. And I'll start off by just saying, um, I would say I have had informal mentorship across the board. And I'm always reaching and looking and Sonia, I consider you that. I mean, we've known each other for a few years now, anyone you can just trade ideas with and learn from. And and helps you push through risk or helps you push through uncertainty. To me, that's the best of mentorship. Not
Yeah.
so much, planning out the next 30 years of your life, but in the flow, in the moment, having someone that you can trust and talk to. And it
Yeah.
is a two-way street. And the best mentors that I've known, and I mentor a handful of people as well, I learned just as much about myself
Mm.
helping somebody else,
Yeah.
or giving someone else advice. So it is such a two-way street.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, it's interesting that you say that because for you, I view you oftentimes as a mentor, and we've never had that discussion. It's coming up now. But I wonder if in some ways, like, even outside, maybe in organizations, I think it could be good to define that because I think you and I are very, both pretty outgoing, pretty social people. We can connect easily. Not everybody is like that. Not everybody is going to go grab and initiate a conversation, and that's okay. But it doesn't mean that they shouldn't have development opportunities, and it doesn't mean that an organization shouldn't help them find somebody that can guide them if they're not proactive enough. So from doing it in a formal standpoint, I think it makes sense. I think it's the right thing for an organization to do. But what's really interesting to me is that, when we started this conversation a few minutes ago, we were talking about the age and the level of experience, and you and I are fairly similar in age and level of experience. We've had different paths in some ways,
Mhm.
but we still learn a lot from each other. And so I think there's so many different ways for organizations to redefine that in a way that's really effective for people. And I think a lot of times, and one of the things that we talked about yesterday is if you're in an organization and if somebody is maybe more traditional, so if you think about somebody that's been in the workforce longer, is maybe a little older, and they're used to being the mentor and they're used to, that relationship being more top down. One of the things we talked about is like, well, how do you create an effective program where you don't put somebody in that spot and they're like, what am I going to learn from this kid? Not in a bad way, but if that's how you've been thinking about for 30, 40, 50 years, during your work time, it's not easy. Just one day, someone's going to tell you, like, oh, you have a lot to learn from other generations. They're like, I'm in. And so we talked a little bit about finding those relationships maybe that are cross departments, relationships where people are maybe in different kind of roles where it becomes more natural that it's not like, well, I'm the CFO and you are a junior analyst and I'm going to, bring you through the ranks, and that, like, that sometimes could feel a little more rigid. So if you are in an organization or working with organizations that are maybe a little more conventional, switching things up a little bit, or maybe finding this even like peer-to-peer relationship with people of different backgrounds, I think can start to reshape what a mentorship or an allyship program could look like that's different than what it traditionally was.
Yeah, and so we have some data that also walks through that some of the most important and trusted connections in the workplace at your organization are in fact
Mm.
either skip level roles. So that means, not your direct manager, but either up or down. Uh, and but even stronger than that are those who are peers and colleagues, who you might work with who aren't necessarily in your organizational hierarchy, right? So the thought around, well, I'm tasked with database management, so I want to be connected and have a mentor with someone who's been in the business for 20 years and is the best at database management.
Mm.
Maybe that's a great connection to have. Absolutely. Someone who can show you things, quickly give you advice. But sometimes it's more important and just as important to learn how to learn, not so much what you learn, right?
Mhm.
And connecting with people in the organization who have similar challenges, but aren't exactly what it is you're looking to solve for, but can give you advice on here's how I navigated this within the walls of this organization. And in fact, hey, I know somebody who I can connect you with who has also struggled with this or has had amazing success with this. So I think mentorship across the walls of hierarchy are so important. And I urge organizations to really go out of their way um, to fight for that and really embrace that and try to amplify that and give opportunity, especially for new people and coming into the workforce. Um, and I think that's allyship and mentorship that I think probably builds a work career that's ultimately more robust and isn't
Yeah.
so specific to the task at hand. Because we're going to have many different jobs in our lifetime. And again, it's learning how to navigate, how to communicate, how to trust, how to show up, how to show empathy. And these are things that you can learn through anybody in the organization who's willing to spend time with you and work with you.
Yeah. I'll quickly add something that's maybe more relevant to mentoring programs and necessarily across generations. So I built one for Question Pro last year, and it was actually for my employee experience survey. It was one of the key areas of opportunity. And it was hard. It was hard to match everybody up and think about the different skill sets. And I was thinking about different levels of seniority. And at the time, I was talking about the two-way mentoring, that it's not the way we had set it up. We did, now thinking about it, have a mentor and a mentee, but the way that we presented it was more of that holistic relationship. And maybe, being somewhat recovering perfectionist that I am, not every relationship worked out. And sometimes people just didn't click. Sometimes somebody left the organization. We had to rematch somebody up. But this was probably about a year and a half ago, and I still have people reach out to me whose relationships really took off and who felt so much value. And to me, that really filled my heart because I thought this is going to be life changing for everybody. And it's impossible in life for anything.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to mention that because, from a general standpoint, and I'd reached out to some of my colleagues and said, Have you found like any software that does like mentoring matchup that could make it more automated and faster? No. It was a lot of manual work, but it was in the cases where people really stuck to it and where they saw value. Again, like I said, very unprompted. A year and a half later, people are reaching out to me, to say that they're still in that mentoring relationship and how useful it's been. So if it sounds like it's something like it's a big task for your organization, I would say still think about it and still do it if you're not doing it today, because I think even if you do it right for a smaller percentage of the population, I think the impact that it will have will be exponential.
Yeah, and one I know we're getting close to time, but one thing I would add too, and this data, again, everyone's been looking at this data, and it's clear it's kind of similar to the learning data curve to some degree. As we start to get a little older, the hunger for mentorship starts to diminish. And maybe it's again because we feel like, well, we know what we need to know. It's not as important. There's a certain level of comfort. I do think that's going to start changing. And the second thing I will just urge everyone and say this, you can learn from a generational standpoint, you can learn so much from anybody, regardless of who they are, where they came from, what they look like, and of course, what age they are. That's our focus for today. And it's okay not and Sonny, you and I were joking about this yesterday, but it's very real. It's okay not to sometimes not understand a conversation. So someone who's 18 talking to someone who's 64, you might send a very short sentence and a few emojis, and you're the person who's 64. I'm like, what? I don't understand what this emoji stands. And so there's this lost in translation moment. Um, and I think it's real important to take that opportunity.
We're gonna slide for that. No.
We're like and create effective communication. And I think this is and I'll quickly say something about this slide, and then Sonia, I know you and I have talked a lot about this, but there is so many ways we communicate now, right? Email, some argue it's becoming very much a thing in the past. It's still very alive and well. Messaging, of course, we all message through different channels. Phone, very few of us actually pick up the phone anymore and call somebody. Social media, of course. I mean, that's a different type of communication and a different type of connection in the vocabulary, emojis. So, Sonny, what do you like for you personally, and then what are you seeing here and what works, and how do we navigate through the vast differences that we all have
Yeah.
within the same organization?
Yeah, and I think this one, I always like laugh with our clients because usually effective communication is where almost everybody scores the lowest because you're never getting enough information. It's maybe never clear enough. The channels, it's overwhelming. Like yesterday, Dan and I were looking, I think, for this exact presentation. He was saying, "Did you WhatsApp it to me, or was it on Slack? Was it an email?"
Yeah.
And it just sometimes it's not necessarily the volume. That there's not enough places, it's too many, or what's the different preference. And so I would say a couple of different things. I think one, again, to, and I'll maybe I'll flip to the next slide for this for the sake of time because it all
Yeah.
ties in. So I think we make a wrong assumption that when somebody doesn't understand something, they're going to be comfortable to raise their hand. They're going to be comfortable to provide a recommendation without ever being asked. And maybe sometimes even being asked, that's why we do a lot of anonymous surveys, is that, ooh, do I want to expose myself that I don't know something that I feel like I should, and then not look good doing it? And so to me, one of the closest questions I think we asked in our study that ties to psychological safety is during meetings, I feel comfortable speaking up and providing my perspective. So imagine this meeting being about mentoring. Imagine this meeting being about learning and development programs. Imagine this meeting being about effective communication. We need to be very careful to get people's input, but get it in such a one, get people's input. I'll pause there. Get it in such a way that they feel comfortable being vulnerable and sharing that. And whether that's an anonymous survey, whether that's a focus group, where they feel okay speaking up. Because who we want to hear from the most are the people that probably don't feel as comfortable speaking up because they're going to be the ones with the greatest challenges. And it is when miscommunication happens, I truly believe that 99% of the time, it is not with ill intentions. It is because we're used to saying something in a certain way. And I laugh because I'll tell you, for me, um, my world every day revolves around three languages. It's English, Spanish, and Serbian in personal life and in professional life. Even in, I would say probably English is maybe the language I'm most comfortable with. Even when I use English, even when I think I'm saying something that's very articulate and clear, a lot of the people that I talk with hear something different or perceive something different. And could it be because of the language that I use? Could it be because I'm tying it in my mind to some other experience that maybe they didn't have or I'm not fully referencing? There's a wide variety of reasons, but I feel like this is one of those things that as we communicate as an organization, as we communicate as individuals, I would think and rethink. I would write the message, read the message, especially if it's something important, to make sure that it's as clear as possible for the person receiving it. We won't always get it right, but one of the, things Dan and I were talking about yesterday a lot of times is messaging. And so messaging, whether you're using Slack or Teams or any messaging on your phone, a lot of times we go fast. And in the world that appreciates speed, we might answer something and something gets autocorrected, or we use a shortcut that the other person doesn't know and the other person misunderstands. And either two things can happen. They'll take action on the misunderstanding, which is worse, or they'll further ask for clarification where you have to write something else. So I think there, I will butcher this saying, but I know that there's a saying that when somebody wrote a letter, and Dan, I don't know if you remember who it was, that said, sorry that this letter is so long. I didn't have time to make it short. Effective, concise, clear communication definitely takes longer, but
Yeah.
boy, is it worth it.
Yeah. I mean, and that's an interesting one because there are, I think there's a couple things, a couple layers of that. And then I want to talk about this data, which I love. There's also, there are people who you know so well where you literally could say three words and they know exactly what you're going to say. Right.
Mhm.
It just happens, or you butcher something and it doesn't matter. They're hardly even reading it. They just need a few cues and they get it. And but that's rare. And so we have to your point, Sanja, be really intentional take care in communication. Less is typically more. But there are times, of course, when more is necessary. And I think in any scenario, especially in the organization, feeling that sense of safety. And I think this data, is the shape of it is very real. I think what happens when people join is I'm not. You have to over time, and Sanja, you and I have addressed this one too, in a previous webinar. But is trust earned, or is it sort of, do you immediately show up and feel safe because you're new that I should trust everybody, I should feel safe? And the answer is probably this data is, screams of the fact that probably not. You do have to earn it. You have to feel comfortable. So it takes a little time. And I think just age too, and this isn't necessarily people who have, it's not following someone's age throughout one organization, but it's experience and communication and listening and being empathetic in the workplace. And eventually you learn how to present yourself and protect yourself. And I think that happens right around that magical spot, but then it does start to drop again. And I think maybe speaking up, as the older we get, we have fear. And I think Callie brought up just a great comment. There's a little bit of a competitive reality going on too. There's a protection mode. Well, I know this is my job. This is my role. And there's all the, new folks coming in. And so, I think there's an opportunity to make sure we're always working together. There's a sense of safety, and there's an incredible responsibility of leadership to build that from the top of the organization, to build that. And then for those who are a part of it, to live it every day. And then to ask questions asking questions and listening and asking someone to explain something or saying, I don't know, everything we've talked about throughout this webinar, that actually helps build safety. Think of any relationship. Like, how do you build safety? You ask questions and you listen and you adapt your behavior based on what you learn. And you do it because you care enough.
Yeah.
And so that's what we need to do in any organization is care enough to listen and care enough to understand there are differences, and that helps create that safety.
Yeah. And I have to say, like, this chart actually, this data surprised me a little bit, because I thought maybe with age, with experience, people would feel more comfortable raising their hand, and they would
Yeah.
feel more comfortable, or maybe they're in rooms where they're more comfortable. Like, I don't know, I expected this to look different. And I know, there's also younger generations are more bold, and, maybe I'm just starting out, so like I'm not expected to know things. But it really surprised me. And again, I think a little bit, if we didn't, it's 65 plus, we didn't tease out the data, but I would be curious to see even what happens after that. And again, if any of you had the assumption like I did, where you would think like, oh, surely somebody more seasoned would always feel comfortable to raise their hand, so I don't have to ask them as much. Like, the younger generations coming in, I need to figure it out, and like all this new technology and their, new needs and wants. But somebody that's been around for a while, surely if something's not working for them, they'll tell me. And actually the opposite is true. And that was just my personal hypothesis. Clearly the data proved me wrong.
Yeah, I think as an interesting observation, we always say, there's a heavy responsibility on those, 50 and above to sort of make sure they're taking care of new folks coming into the workplace. But there's also a responsibility of early young workers to reach out and have empathy to kind of how things were done. I mean, and I think, and that will create, I think, comfort for those who are maybe feeling a little bit older, but still need to work, and they have to work, and they're
Yeah.
passionate, and like so there is no, like, it's a give and take, and it's a two-way street, and I think that's a theme in this data. I mean, I was a little surprised too, Sonia, when I first saw this chart. But it's real data, and I think it's important to pay attention to. There's clearly an opportunity for sharing, creating safety across generations. And again, as we've said, and I hopefully we've gotten that point across, there's so much you can learn There's no right or wrong generation, except for X, of course. That's but
Hey.
kidding, of course. I said all generations, all the other generations. But and you need to show up and listen and talk and ask questions and raise your hand. So yes, X Day.
So,
We have a few minutes.
I'm keeping an eye on the time.
Yeah.
So just with that, as you can tell, Dan and I always have a lot to say about the different topics. But before leaving, and we can stick around for a few minutes for Q&A if any of you have questions. But we did want to invite you to Question Pros X Day. So if you enjoyed today's conversation, if you felt like you're, surrounded by friends, which I hope you did, we'd love for you. We do our event every year in Austin. This year it'll be October 3rd. Dan's been one of our long-standing guests, friends of the house, personal friends. It's, come and led different sessions. You can see a lot of these smiling faces that are going to be, focused on an employee experience track. And really, it's, one of them is my former roommate. I won't tell you which one. For my graduate program, we have clients, we have dear friends, we have book authors, real, trailblazers in the area of employee experience. So if you want to join us and really get to know us better, get to know our guests better, become an even closer part of this community, as a guest in our today's webinar, we did give you a code for a complimentary pass and also a URL where you can log in and learn more about who else is going to be there and other sessions that are in our additional guests. But if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. But we'd love continue to build this community, Dan and I, and Question Pro. And so if we could have an opportunity to see you in person and, share some more conversations, a coffee, drink, whatever, whatever you enjoy, it would be a pleasure to have you there. So we just wanted to sneak that in. And then I know we're probably a little bit over time now, but Dan, I don't know if you've been keeping an eye on the chat, if there's any questions or if it's more goodbyes and farewells.
Yeah, I mean, I was keeping an eye on it as we were going. I think Callie had a great point. I mean, really, it's just about just the importance of mentorship across, find people who care about your success. I think bottom line is, and there can be sometimes, and I, Callie, I know you're approaching this too from the artist and being an actor and being a little different style of work than corporate America. So I think that, but it doesn't matter, that mentorship and finding someone who believes in you and can support you holds true in whatever we do, wherever we are, wherever we work. So thank you for that comment. And just a few other comments are just thanking us. And so, but we thank you for
Yeah.
showing up and being a part of this conversation. And do message us on LinkedIn with any questions. And this was so much fun, Sanja.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Dan. And thank you, all of you, for coming and joining us. Time is the most precious resource we have. It's so always so grateful to share this space and share knowledge with all of you. And like Dan was saying, please, do connect with us, do reach out if you have any ideas, if you have any questions. Dan and I, we didn't say this today, but we actually met virtually at one of the conferences, I think maybe during the pandemic. And now we became really close friends. So even though luckily we're back to, social gatherings and being able to see each other in person, I never underestimate the power of virtual connection as well, as proven by the friendship Dan and I have been able to, to build and maintain over time. So again, thank you for your time. Thank you, Dan, so much. It's always so
You.
fun. I always learn so much from you,
Um,
whether it's a webinar or a conversation or a quick coffee or a drink. So thank you for joining us today. And thank you all again for coming.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Sanja. And we'll
Yeah.
talk pretty soon. Amazing. So much fun. Enjoy.